We're in this weird stage where we have access to everything we could ever need to know, but we also have more distractions than ever.
If I would have just focused, I probably would have gotten a lot further, a lot faster.
He has done over $10 million in his agency. His expertise background is in the sales world. Nik Robbins.
From humble beginnings, he was able to identify how he wants to achieve success. He is the man with the leverage. JR Rivas.
We live in the most prosperous times in human history because of capitalism. Is it a house of cards? Probably.
Do you think the money system is broken?
Yes.
My big thing is compared to what and what's going to replace it.
When government gets involved in money, there are issues.
The government has to be involved in money. A lot of conventional loans are backed by the government.
Nothing will get solved if we don't fundamentally reform how we educate our children. What is the worst possible thing that can happen to you at school? You fail a class. What's the most important thing to succeed in life? Fail. But it's our biggest fear.
How do you update your belief system on these big philosophical life questions?
Get away from how I feel about things as one true source of making decisions.
I reflect. Observation through learning, through thinking, through studying.
All right, we're back. Welcome back to the Golden Mic. I'm here with, what's up, Nick?
What's going on, man?
Nik Robbins JR. You've been on. You were the first episode,
Return
bro.
guest.
Yeah, you're the first return guest on it. Really quick, because you're my friends. I don't know if anyone else on YouTube or on listening knows you. Nick, who are you?
Man, it's a deep question, bro. Name's Nick, right? And build businesses, do stuff online, make money, like to talk about Bitcoin, and like to live peacefully in life, you know?
Yeah. Why don't you believe in Jesus? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we will. JR, people know you, but recap just for the listeners.
JR, entrepreneur, build businesses online, do real estate, and yeah.
This is the first triple podcast that we're doing with three of us here. Nick and your wife, Sema, you guys were up here visiting from, well, where are you from?
We're from Florida.
Florida. Did you get hit with a hurricane?
We got stuck out here for the hurricane, actually.
You got stuck out here? Yeah, 'cause you
we
came
were
from
already
Vegas.
in Phoenix, then we were going to go home and come back to Vegas, but we decided to extend the trip.
Cool. Welcome to the show. Appreciate you guys coming on. We have lots we could talk about. We've been talking about Bitcoin. We've been talking about business. One of the things I think was interesting, and I'd like to pick up the conversation here, is I feel like the world is crazy right now, but specifically with business, I feel like it's hard. And I think that a lot of people that are in business right now, whether if they're starting or if they've been in it for a while, that maybe things aren't working, that they think they're alone. So I don't know. Let's pick up the conversation there. I'll start with you. Because you've been in it for how long?
Yeah,
how long?
10 years.
10 years?
Yeah,
in internet marketing, right?
Hard's relative, man. Like, it's weird. We're in this weird stage where simultaneously we have access to everything we could ever need to know to build a business, but we also have more distractions than ever, right? And so being able to manage that dichotomy and knowing when you're learning too much versus actually executing is a difficult thing.
Yeah, but I mean like just the market right now, and I'll start with the one thing that's annoying me right now is ads, friggin' paid ads, bro. Gosh, right? But like paid ads, like what it used to be 3, 4, 5 years ago versus now, right? Or the cost to acquire clients, or getting results and fulfilling, or legal issues, or like whatever. I just feel like business, the world, the market right now is hard. Yes?
No. I met Nick in 2016.
Yeah.
And we were both kind of starting marketing agencies at the time. And at the time, like Facebook ads and all shit like that, it was easier technically, but it was also harder because nobody knew, like there was no information on it back then.
Yeah.
Like I remember you scaled your agency originally by making customized videos for doctors like 8 hours a day and sending them the videos in their email inbox. And yeah, but at the time, Facebook ads were technically a lot cheaper, a lot easier, less disabled accounts and all that kind of stuff. But it was harder because nobody had really figured it out yet. So it was just a different kind of hard. At the time, like it was extremely hard for me to just get started, like understanding all this stuff, learning all these different things, really just trying to learn ad strategy. But technically at the time, there was less people, less competition. So it would have been easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just feel like people are hesitant to spend right now. Like the overall broad climate is more difficult and for a lot of people. And like, I mean, early days for me, dude, people were just printing money, right? It was like you hop on, you launch a webinar, you turn on some Facebook ads, you make $1 million, right? And like now I feel like maybe this is a better way to frame it, which is I feel like the internet marketing bubble has caught up to reality, or reality's caught up the internet marketing bubble?
The sales process is shifted, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, you could pump out a webinar. It could be anything, right? And you could make money on the back end.
Yeah.
Now you have to be a little bit more strategic with what you do. You have to be smarter about your ideal client, who you're targeting, how you're doing it. Because we're crushing with ads right now. You know what I mean? And so like, I love paid ads. I know that you're an organic guy, but you know what's even better? If you're good, if you have organic and then you can sprinkle paid ads on top, dude.
No, we're getting, I mean, like we're committed. Like we're in this game. We're figuring it out. Okay. So I want to set up this conversation a little bit for people. JR, I think you do a good job of giving context. So this circle right here, the three of us, give people some context on us and how we know each other, how you know him, how you know me, and all that. And then I think what would be really cool is being philosophical, like kind of our views on life and on business and on things. I think we all have a very different perspective, but also a lot of it overlaps. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to do with this show and just these conversations in general is to bring structure to thought, if that makes sense. Meaning, it's crazy, dude. You get out into the world. I live in a bubble. You definitely live in a bubble. Like I'm pretty sure I probably live in a bubble, right? So we live in the bubble, but it's like you get out into the real world, if you will, or you just get out into other people's lives and you realize that like a lot of people either A, have completely different experiences and structure than you, or they lack it entirely. Like people don't know how to like pull apart ideas, how to think about things and like kind of go through things, right? And I kind of want to hear some contrast between the two of you, because once again, you guys are both similar in a lot of ways, but I'm going to turn to you to set up. Give us a background. How do you know him? How do you know me?
We met I'm pretty sure we met at ClickFunnels in 2016. We stayed at that house in Dallas.
That's right. I was trying to think when we met.
When you guys went into the neighbor's house by accident.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. 6 a.m.
Wait. Okay, start there.
All right. So the last night, I like to drink, we like to party a little bit, but we'd made it through the entire event. And me and my business partner at the time, we decided to go out a little bit, and we went out a little too hard, ended up at, some strip clubs. Well, it got stolen by a stripper, all that stuff.
Jesus, bro.
Yeah, it was bad. Bro, you should have seen me trying to get through TSA the next day.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't taking his name in vain, dude. I'm just kidding.
But basically, we got dropped off at like 5 a.m. and my business partner, we were in these like huge mansions in Dallas.
And they had a long ass driveway to get to the door.
And I watch him walk up and I'm like, that's not the right house. I'm just screaming at him from the sidewalk. And he just walks in the neighbor's house. Right. And then he walked out because they came, and then the cops showed up because our place next door because they're like, hey, neighbors called. Did you guys go in a different house? And like, I'd already had another beer to get going in the morning. It was different time, different version of me. But yes, that was, and he was in the house that time. And that was when we first met.
Yeah, but I think we originally met through just like Facebook group circles. Dude, we ended up in like a group chat. Yeah.
That's right, Mike. Oh yeah. I remember that guy. The reason why we met was a particular individual. That's right.
We ended up in like a group chat together. And then we all planned to go to funnel hacking. And then, how did we like keep up after that? I think just kept seeing you at like different events and
groups,
stuff.
Yeah.
What year was this?
2016.
2017.
Yeah.
It was February 2017.
Yeah. So it was the group chat and everything started in 2016. And then we went to funnel hacking a couple months later.
And we were all kind of coming up together, right? Yeah. So like, I mean, I heard about him, and you had a Cairo agency at the time. Mm-hmm. You were doing 10K a month. Our agency scaled very quickly back then. I mean, we went from like 0 to 100K a month in like 10 months. It was after a year of doing nothing. So there was a lot of effort to get there. And so like, we were just kind of like hanging out because we're all kind of coming up together. Mm-hmm.
So did you meet Sema through him?
No. I think you guys met at that same event.
I never actually met her at the event. I didn't meet her until another event with John Logar.
Oh, and we met John Logar at that event.
But we all met through the same Facebook group. So me and Ball Deep, one of our buddies, we started a Facebook group, Business Not Bullshit. And that's kind of where it all got started. We used to do this thing called like Fuck It Fridays, where we just get on there and we just talk about building agencies. And then people just started showing up and hanging out. And that's where we met her. We had tickets to an event and gave her the ticket. And that's how I ended up meeting her.
Interesting. When did you meet Sema? Sema is your wife, by the way, for the listeners. Yeah.
Dan Henry's group. I think Sema just messaged me and she was like, hey, I'm nervous about this whole agency thing. I'm thinking if I should quit my job. And
is that how it worked? She's over there.
Wait, you should come tell the story on Josh's mic.
Sure, if you want to. Yeah, come sit down.
So just to add a little something, I actually didn't realize this until you just said that. you added me to the Business Not Bullshit Facebook group
Oh,
because
yeah.
some drama was happening.
Wait, so I'm responsible for
You
your marriage?
technically are. I didn't
That's
realize
crazy.
that until you just said that. So you added me to that Facebook group and you messaged our group and you were like, oh my God, there's some drama happening in this group right now. And I paid attention and then I saw that they were doing those Facebook Lives and ended up joining on them. And that's how we technically met. But what was the other question? How did we
met?
meet?
Yeah.
So I messaged you online. I'd seen you had success with Dan's program.
Whoa.
Success with Dan's program. And I messaged you and I was like, hey, I'm trying to figure out this internet marketing thing. I'm trying to decide if I should get a job right now or if I should just like, you know, get my shit together, figure this out. And then you were like, you know, if you put in the work, like you'll be able to have success. And I didn't end up getting a job. And
Wow. So motivational.
yeah, it was.
That's right. You were.
It makes sense that I officiated your wedding then. I should have told this story.
I didn't realize that.
Me
until
either.
now.
That's right. You were one of Dan's biggest case studies at the beginning. I still
Dude,
remember that
still
webinar.
to this day, I go to like ClickFunnels and someone's like, "Yo, I followed you since the Dan Henry days. You were his top case study."
So both of you had agencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yours was in the Cairo space originally? I didn't know that. What was yours in? Oh, you're in the medical space, right?
Functional medicine.
Functional
we
medicine.
worked with a lot of chiropractors too.
Okay. And is that the one that you scaled? Like that was your big one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you really did, you just did nothing and then you found the one and then you scaled that one all the way up.
100% niche down, man.
So like, how did you know to focus on that one thing?
So it was actually by chance that I learned about niching down. I'll never forget. I learned the prospecting method from Billy Jean. Shout out, Billy. Literally shot custom videos. And dude, speaking of it being hard, back then I'd use like 8 different softwares. It took me like 4 hours to make a video. I'd have to email it. There was none of the shit we had today. But I was having a conversation with a doctor, and I was learning about his patient care treatments. And he told me about this thing called hyaluronic acid injections. And essentially what that is injections to cure osteoarthritis of the knee. I'm like, great. Why do you like that? And he's like, well, Medicare covers it. I make a lot of money. Insurance covers it. So most people have it. And there's a big spread. And so we ended up getting him as a client. And I thought to myself after that call, I wonder how many other chiropractors have hyaluronic acid and get Medicare reimbursements. And so what I did was I just literally went to scrape the top 5 pages of Google and found every single clinic website that had hyaluronic acid on it, and I shot them a custom video, and that just blew up our agency. And so it was like my old saying used to be one niche, one funnel, 1 million, right? Because that's what took us to it. And it was literally one type of client. And so like I still believe in niching down to this day, especially if you're getting started.
Wow. I mean, I feel like, yeah, that's the only way to get started.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel
100%.
like, that's interesting. How many did you do before you, did you jump around at all? Like in different agencies and stuff?
No, not really. I
Nope.
mainly just did chiropractors, and I got my first client through. I actually ran Facebook ads.
Your first client?
Yeah. And it was a free trial offer, and it was literally like a 5-minute Facebook ad where I'm like, basically showing them the whole process of like how we bring leads in. A process that I didn't even really know actually worked. I just kind of had talked to one person that was like, I have a couple chiro clients. I'm running this offer. So I built like a landing page, I built an ad, and then I recorded a 5-minute video. And at the end, I was like, I'll do this for you for free, because I just didn't believe anybody would pay me, especially with like no credibility off the internet.
Yeah.
The internet in 2016 was still kind of borderline.
Yeah, so sketch for sure.
So ran an ad, got a lead, this dude in Robeson, North Carolina. And then we did it for a week. He paid me $1,500. Dude, I like that $1,500 felt like $1 million at the time.
Yeah.
And then a week later, he sent me 2 friends, and one was North Carolina, one was in Florida. They each sent me like 1 or 2 people. And then one of my biggest mistakes was that I just didn't scale it harder earlier on.
Yeah. When did you, how did you do the affiliate because you won the ClickFunnels, car.
That was one of my shiny object side quests.
Yeah. How did you do that? Or like, when did that shift over?
Grass is always greener. I'm like, I'm making money with Kairos. Everything's fine. At the time, it was so easy. You literally made like.
See, that's my point. It was so easy.
You made once you figured out
over here.
My whole campaign was this: run a Facebook ad. The spend was $1,000 a month. So how much is that? Like $30 a day. $30 a day. Lead comes in. Lead goes to active campaign. They get into the client. they get an email, here's your voucher, call this number to redeem it. And that was it. That was the whole, there was no fucking call rail, go high level didn't exist yet. It was very simple. And in hindsight, I was like I was just an idiot for not just going harder at it, but I wanted to go be like an affiliate and I got distracted with that. And then I wanted to do masterminds and do courses and do live events and all this different stuff. Whereas if I would have just focused, I probably would have gotten a lot further, a lot faster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm coming back to your thing with the, well, actually, let me tell mine, because mine was organic again, not paid ads. It was Instagram. And I had bought an Instagram course. I'd been trying to sell like affiliate stuff, like digital cameras or I mean, I had a job at the time. I had no idea what I was doing, right? And just trying different things. I was working night shift and then waiting tables at Olive Garden and like just trying to make some money as I was figuring the thing out. But then I bought this Instagram course and I think I got like 10,000 followers, maybe 20,000, right? Which was like, I was basically famous, right? But like the first dollar I ever made was that somebody reached out and they offered to pay me to post a picture on the account. I think it was $20. And I would be like, what? Like, you just want me to post it and you're just going to send me money? And they're like, yeah. And so I posted it and they PayPal'd me like $20. And I remember being like, yo, right? Like, this is insane. It was the first time I didn't actually have to put out effort, like real, like directly correlated to that. And I stuck with Instagram to like 7 million followers. The problem is that the margins on that, I mean, most people are paying for advertising, the distribution of it, right? So like if you have a lot of followers, great, but like there's no money, there's not much margin in it, right? Because it takes a lot to go and do that. So that was my start in just.
And we met at ClickFunnels at the Boise.
Oh yeah,
Blue Turf event.
Yeah, where was that? The
viral event.
Is that the world record that we no longer hold?
Yo, I hated Josh when I first met him.
Really?
Yeah.
I was like, this guy's such a douchebag.
That's true,
bro. Okay,
look at my hair, dude.
You came across as like I'm better than everybody, basically.
Look at my hair, bro.
And then that world record shit that held up for like 2 years.
Yeah, and then someone else did it.
I still have the plaque.
Yeah, but
Sam has the plaque too.
Have you ever seen the Gary Vee clip that where he like roasts?
Oh yeah, where he roasts you for being a Patriots fan.
That's where we met.
That was at
that was at the event. Went and did the bubble soccer afterwards.
He's like dick.
Yeah. We should like B-roll over it, right? Because I invited him to the Super Bowl.
Posts that shit.
Yeah, like every once a year, once every other year, and I'm kind of like, bro, at least tag me, right? I'm like,
and then you go to the comments, you see Josh in the comments like, "That's me, ha ha ha."
Back when he first started posting it, now just whenever people tag me in it, and they're like, whatever. But he did it as like his top roasts of all time, like his top 5 roasts or whatever, and that was number 1. He picked it, right? Because he hates the Patriots so much. He's so funny. But I want to come back to the thing with Medicare, because I want to pivot the conversation to what you said there, which was he liked it because the government paid for it, basically, right? Okay, let's go down a rabbit hole. How much of what do you think about the fact that the government is so involved in the private sector business? I mean, medical is, I think, probably the biggest front facing of what we see, although I think it's much, much, much bigger than that now. I mean, the food industry, the medical industry, the car industry, I mean, farming, all of it, right? But like, do you think that that's a good thing?
Loaded question, bro. So one thing I will say before I go on anything is I think that one thing most all Americans can agree on is that healthcare sucks. There's a huge problem with it, right? So over time, what's interesting is it used to be great and Medicare was awesome from 2016 to about 2019, but the laws started changing. And so like this was all secondhand information from the doctors with it, and the reimbursements got lower and the coverage got different and all of that stuff. How do I feel about the government taking care of people's needs? I think it's a challenging. It depends on where we're going.
Let's zoom out. Okay, so I think that right now we have an election coming up, right? In like, I don't know, depending upon when you're watching this, maybe next week, right? But it's very soon, a couple weeks here, and I think that most people that are sitting down to vote that are not completely brainwashed, all right? Like there's a large percentage of America on both sides, by the way, right? That are completely brainwashed, right? They're voting because it's what they've always voted for or whatever, right? But I do think that there is probably a significant amount of people in America that are voting that are they're sitting down and they're trying not to be brainwashed. They're putting some thought into it, right? And they're trying to make a rational, informed decision. Whether or not they are or not is to be seen. But I think that you're basically voting for a worldview. Would you agree with that? Right? like you're voting for a lens almost. It's like forget the two politicians for a second. It's like if you just took their name out of it, like the approach and the vision that the one side has for America is very, very different than the approach and the vision that the other side has for America. Now, regardless of what you think of Trump, the fact that he's bringing in a lot of other people like Elon with the, wanting to create I love the fact that that's the meme, the Doge, D-O-J-E or D-O-G-E is Department of Government Efficiency, and he's going to head it up. It's like, it's so amazing, right? So like you have Trump coming in and, people can say, oh, he's big government, he's big money. I'm like, I mean, maybe, but also he's going to bring in a guy who's going to gut half the government. You've got, RFK, who's getting RFK Jr., all about make America healthy again, right? You have one that seems to be away from government power, right, and in government involvement, and at least more free speech, more personal freedoms. And then you have the other that with Kamala, where it would seem that whoever is behind her or whatever would be more government control or government power and things of that nature. Would you agree with that? Okay, so. From coming at it from a big picture philosophy, do you think that the money system in America is the thing that is keeping America and all of its chaos alive? The money system, the current money system.
I think it's the current money system. It is keeping us all alive right now, for sure. Because that's what the backbone of everything's created off of. Now, how strong that money system is, it's tough to tell. Right. We're what are we at, $38 trillion or something? It's like $200 billion a quarter. One thing that you brought up, though, that I will say about the ideologies on both sides, right? We're moving towards a world right now where there's a lot of people who believe that no one is collectively responsible for their personal actions, but everyone is responsible for everybody else's actions.
Interesting.
And that's like a really weird frame. I mean, it's a communistic frame to look at, right? And it's basically the way I see it, it's personal responsibility versus victimhood in a lot of ways, right? There's one that worships, hey, you bootstrap, you pick yourself up, take advantage of these opportunities, all of that stuff. And there's another where it's like, you have something, you should give it to me. You know, and then I understand where some people can come, why they get to that point. I don't agree with it. I think it's a terrible way to live. It basically means that somebody else always has power over you. Yeah. And one of my goals in life is to make sure that no one has power over me. You know what I mean?
100%.
But I do think it's an ideological choice at the end of the day,
Okay. So coming at it from that, would you agree that it's all held up by the money, right? Okay. So the fact that you can have healthcare how it is and the government involved in it is the fact that they can just print money, which is stealing human life. And we'll go down that at some point, right? But okay, so you have this system. So do you think the money system is broken?
Yes.
It depends on what we mean by broken. The question I always like to ask when I'm having this conversation is compared to what?
Well, you know where
I know where you're going with it, but compared to what we've seen, right? Okay. And so I'm hesitant to say that something is completely broken when it's brought more prosperity to people living here than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so while I certainly believe that there's many issues with it, and the deeper anyone, and I know we're going to go here, right? Deeper down the fiat chain, you have to start questioning things and looking at it. Yeah. My big thing is, okay, compared to what, and what's going to replace it if it was nuked tomorrow?
Okay. So let me frame the question, because that's actually a really good point. Okay. What about it is working?
Well, we're here talking to a camera and people are watching it. You know what I mean? So technologically still been able to advance. We live in the most prosperous times in human history because of capitalism purely. That's one of my favorite things to talk about with people who don't believe that. It's like, well, get rid of your nice stuff because no one will want to do it. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But is it a house of cards? Probably. I don't see how it's not. It doesn't make sense to me, and maybe it's above my pay grade. Probably is. I don't see how it's not a house of cards because it's all thin air and just printed out of nowhere. We printed 70% of the dollars in the last 3 years or something like that. Something absurd. So it's definitely broken from that standpoint. I just get fearful of compared to what, and it's is it the best we've seen that's led to the most prosperous, time in human history, despite what people tell us? People act like it's the end, dark days. Yes, there's a lot of issues and frameworks and we're divided for sure. But if you just look at the pure data on it, there's a lot of prospering happening, right? Now, I also see where this is going. If you study history and read books by Ray Dalio and people way smarter than me, it's all right, well, this is the same path that every major freaking, country or civilization has gone down the last 2,000 years. Yep. And we're going the same thing. Right. They basically just deflate the currency to a point where it's not worth anything. Yep. And we're on that way.
Okay. So I think it's interesting that you brought up the fact that we're very prosperous, because we are, right? I think we live in the most prosperous time ever in history. And think of, the way I like to think about the debt bubble and the fact that you can just kind of print money. It's kind of like drugs, because It's, hey, we've got this thing and we want to do something with it. So let's take a drug to make me smarter, or let's take a drug to make me feel good, right? And then it's like, oh, we advanced, right? Like, expanded. And then we have to take more, and then we have to take more, and it's like a downward spiral, right? And it would seem to me, and I'm curious, I'm going to bring this all the way back to the original question of with the chiropractor thing, right? Not the chiropractor. Healthcare, yeah, right? Where it's coming in is, it would seem to me that when government gets involved in money, there are issues. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Okay. So I don't know how to ask this question. I'm going to ask it. Help me ask you it, right? Which is, do you think that the fact that, like, for example, the medical, this guy with the medical, it's, I'm doing things because I'm rewarded with the most money, and the government is the one that is rewarding me for doing that thing. That's not the free market, right? Or is it? No, it's not the free. Okay, great. So then should we strive to create a system, or do you think that government should be out of money? And if government should be out of money, then what do we as a society, like what do you and I do? What do we do as an entrepreneur, as someone that is participating in this society? How do we not play into that? Or do we have no choice, right? And let me frame it one level deeper with it. I had a guy who's also a believer. He actually goes to my church, a different location, right? And he's big, VC, raised I think hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I mean, and all that. And he's like, hey, his vision is to start a fund and raise all this money and use the funds to do, like he called it, kingdom work, right? And like basically do things that are, aligned with biblical principles and blah, 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 and all that. And my hesitation, the thing that I said to him is, I go, it's not that I don't think that that's a good idea, maybe. Like, I think your intentions are good. But to me, it's like you're trying to build inside of a broken system, right? And one of the things that I think actually, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to turn the question back to you. Does that make sense? What do we do if that's the case?
I mean, it's a great question. It is the question, right? Because you got the system, we got the cards that were dealt, right? It's hard to just kind of opt out. As much as I would love to send a letter to the IRS and be like, I opt out of paying taxes, right? Mm-hmm. And I can point to the Constitution, it's illegal, whatever. You know what I mean? Right. Now, but really quick though, I do have a question for you, right? Because government is involved in money.
Hit me with questions too.
Yeah, no, because there is something this is something that was huge for me when I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, is who's actually making the decision for money? Are they elected officials?
Right.
In the Federal Reserve?
They're not.
They're not?
No.
So we have unelected officials.
The Federal Reserve is not a government entity. It is a privately owned bank that we
Which
don't
makes
know
it all
who
even
owns
more crazier. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, it's all nuts.
Yep.
And so the only thing that I can say is, because it's hard, because humans make decisions based off incentives.
Yep.
Right. And so, like, this is why big pharma works so well and why doctors hand out prescriptions, because they're incentivized to do so. Right. So if you ever want to follow someone's behavior, follow the incentives. This is like psychology 101.
Yes.
If you ever wonder why someone's doing something. So breaking the incentives, going off chain, it just requires a huge amount of, like, balls, we'll say, in order to go for it.
Before I discovered Bitcoin, and I think we're just going to dive into this and we can take it wherever we want to go. But before I discovered Bitcoin, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, America's amazing and life is very optimistic, right? And then I kind of got into the real world. I kind of started seeing everything, and I'm like, yikes. And then I started to kind of learn about money and how the fact that everything's corrupt. And I looked at America and I'm like, we're the leading force for good, and we are super messed up, right? Like, yes, we have we have some better morals than, maybe perhaps some other countries and entities on some things, but we are, at least front facing, we do, right? But we're pretty messed up. And so to me, it was like, the future was kind of hopeless. It was this thing of like, I was like, it has to crash. It has to crash and burn, because we can't fix the system, right? Like, the system needs to collapse in order for us to fix it, right? I think the giant was too big. And so when I looked at it that way, I went, we have no other option but to play the game. There is no other game to play, right? So you build a business, you hope you get rich, you buy some land, you maybe get off grid, I don't know, maybe you build big companies, you get involved, whatever. You try to, Then I discovered Bitcoin, and it was like, I know it sounds cheesy and you see it a lot on Twitter, but it's like, it was almost like a lifeboat, right? And it was like, wait a second, hold on. There is a way to build something that is outside of this fiat world, right? There is a way, and it's really new. The analogy I use is, imagine you were on the Mayflower and you got off the Mayflower in America, and it's like the first colony, and you're like, great, like it's way more convenient and easy and stuff in England, and you could make way more money in England, and you could, like, if you just stayed overseas. But if you get off the Mayflower, it's like this land of opportunity, and it's just open, vast nothingness, right? And so to me, I go, okay, there is a lifeboat. There is a reality where we can start to build things and do things outside of this broken system. And because I'm aware of that, one of the things that I wrestle with, and one of the things that, we've been talking for 3-4 hours today already, right? One of the reasons I keep asking questions, I'm like, I don't even care what your answer is. And I'm not even trying to convince you of Bitcoin, or I'm not trying to convince you this is, I'm like, you're smart. You're people that I respect very, very much. You're close friends. I'm like, how do you think about things? What do you see? Like, I'm trying to understand your view of the world with it, right? And so I go, okay, because to me, like, money, success, all that fame, all that, once I recommend my life to Christ, I was like, all right, God, whatever, like, you call me to do. And I love my wife. I have no desire to go, be massively famous or a concert, be a singer, or, like that anymore. Like, I just want to live a life of purpose. I want to be a dad. I want to, be involved in my church. I want to, like, build things that matter and are meaningful. And so I look at that and I go, well, playing in this world over here just doesn't seem to make much sense. Like, I'm 100%, I'm very open about it. I'm 100% in Bitcoin, 100%, like nothing else, right? Except for 5 Tesla stocks that support Elon. And the reason I did that is not because I'm like, oh, I'm going to get rich because it's Bitcoin. I'm like, no, because I want to be part of the system that's out of it. Does that make sense? And so I think the question I'm asking is the portal of the fact that the government is incentivizing an entrepreneur, right? This business owner, this medical practice, right? To do something, and we're driven by incentives, right? Is, if that is happening at mass scale, if we as entrepreneurs take part in that, are we just taking part of, or are we just playing in the system and are we part of, I don't know, are we part of the problem? But, like, should we be doing that? Or how does that make sense?
Yeah. I actually got a response for you in regards to being 100% in Bitcoin, right? Because we talked about our portfolio allocations and all of that stuff. So the way I look at it, and the way I look at every decision these days, is what's my downside versus upside, right? What's the risk involved? And I'm always looking for the asymmetric risk. I have a pretty healthy chunk in Bitcoin. I think I said 25%. Like, I'm a believer. I got a lot there. But at the same time, positioning is what's most important to me. And by positioning, I mean, what's my exit strategies, right? What happens if things go to shit? What happens if things break, right? And so, or what if they don't? What if, somehow they shut off the internet and you can't even access Bitcoin anymore because you need freaking electricity to do it, like some catastrophic event. And it's like, well, at least I've got this, or, whatever. So it's like, I always look at the downside versus upside. And so, like, it's just about positioning to protect against the all-weather portfolio is what Ray Dalio would call it. Like, and now he would never say put 25% Bitcoin, but right. You know what I mean? And so in regards to participating in it versus not, I think that really comes down to, like, what are your long-term goals? What are you looking to do about it? And so, like, I see myself as participating in it, but also I'm playing the cards that I'm dealt for myself and my family. Yeah. And then I believe the only way you can change the world, and this is to all the people who say the world needs to change and burn and don't actually do anything, is to actually change yourself and then go out and build businesses or go do things to impact it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the response.
And by the way, like, I'm not saying the fact that I own Bitcoin, the fact that that's where my portfolio is at, that's not what I'm talking about, but that is it was a great point. What I'm saying is that I'm trying to figure out how to make decisions in a fiat world, because this world, this other lifeboat world over here, isn't here yet, right? Like, it still needs to be built, right? And so, like, all right, I'm going to go, and let's say I build a company. I think that in the fiat world, being an entrepreneur, building a company is the highest level of value, right? I think that is, I don't know, morally, but, like, from a value and economic perspective and affecting change, right? And so I go, okay, then at what point, if all you do ever is play in the entrepreneurship game, and in the fiat world, right? In this system that it is, maybe we end up at the end of our lives and the bubble's still going. Perhaps, could be, right? But if all we do is play in that, then I don't think that's morally wrong per se, but it's like, then what's the purpose of, like, what change are you trying to affect? And when I think about things at a fundamental level, you talk about, the Bible talks about wise man built his house upon a rock. Right? I'm like, everything that is based in this world, like, I think we all look around and we go, there's a problem. The debt is a problem, right? Like, I think most people might not think that, but, like, it's a problem, yeah? So it's a problem? So it's like, okay, if that's a problem, and it's like, and that's the foundation of it all. That's literally what holds all of this thing up, and it's going to pop. Like, at some point, I don't know what that looks like, right? But we can't go on forever. When it does pop, or when it does shift, when that foundation does get ripped out from underneath you, maybe we get lucky and it's not happens in our lifetime. I doubt it, but maybe. But when it does, then what? And I'm like, I feel like now, at least in my head, the fact that what caused me to go so strongly into literally simplifying my business down to where I have a goal to be in my business 2 to 3 hours a week. 2 to 3 hours a day within 12 months. So that I can go study more about how to build like a parallel system of like opting out of fiat, like getting back to sound principles. And so I'm just curious, I go, if the government is involved with money, and the reason that this whole system is a big massive bubble, right? And it is because they can print money, and they're printing money and incentivizing people to do what they want, and they have control by playing in. How much of a responsibility or a role do we have to say, well, if I want to see change, then I should play in this world enough to where I can have my life and support my family, and like you said, like for why it exists. But at what point, if ever, do you shift out and still start going to look for a different solution?
Do you think the government has to be involved in money, or you're saying the government doesn't have to be or shouldn't be involved in money?
I think that the government should not be involved with money.
I think the government has to be involved in money.
Okay. How so?
Perfect example. If you get an FHA loan, it's insured by the government. Most FHA, VA, a lot of conventional loans are backed by the government.
Yeah.
So that's an example of like most people probably wouldn't be able to buy a house. They already can't afford a house, but without a 3% down payment or whatever, unless the government was backing it. Also, there's government subsidies in farming. There's government subsidies in medical that are necessary just for the society to function as we know it.
But do we think that they are necessary?
School's a good example. Elementary school and stuff like that is paid by property taxes directed by the local government.
But do you think that's necessary?
Yes, because without the government there, who would facilitate that?
The private sector.
So yes, but then if you were to get a home loan today through the private sector, your interest rate's going to be higher, your down payment's going to be higher. Not attainable for the average person. Barely attainable now with the government's help by the average person.
Yep. So my response to that would be that the reason that it is unattainable is because of the system that we're living in, with out of control government driving up prices, inflation, printing money, and the fact that the government got involved in the first place. And so this system, in this world, you're correct. But imagine a scenario where this system collapsed and we built a new one. Just imagine a parallel universe for a second where the money was hard money and the government was not involved. Okay. So if the government was not involved in the money, then it wouldn't be able to corrupt or manipulate the money. So now, like back 100 years ago, right? Like a house was very affordable for a lot of people, right? Yeah, you might have to save up for a couple years, but like the average person would have been able to go and purchase a home without a problem, right? Even if they would have had to go get a loan for it. And so because when the government started printing money, and when the government started getting involved in all these other things, they had to print money, but that's driving up all the homes. So the fact that the government is involved in all these things is the reason that the government has to be involved in these things.
Yes,
does that make sense?
But I think there's a balance, because a perfect example of this is how in other countries, if you don't have money and you need to go to the hospital, they're like either pay up or die. And in the US, that's not legal. Most people wouldn't be able to send their kids to elementary school or middle school or whatever if you had to pay for your child's education from kindergarten and beyond. So gas is subsidized by the government sometimes. There's just a lot of, I think that there's a balance in the system where, I grew up on welfare, for example, and in the United States, there's almost nobody goes hungry in the United States. Like we have thousands of homeless people in Denver. None of them go hungry because they can go to a soup kitchen and all that stuff's funded by the government. So I think there's definitely a balance where the government should and has to be involved. But we were just talking about how the government's involved in real estate and real estate law, and there's all these different fees. And like the other day I had to call the courthouse because my contractor got arrested and I was trying to figure out like what his docket was, his court date, all that kind of stuff. And first place didn't pick up, called them back for courthouse. Then he was like, oh, you need to call this courthouse instead. They have the information over there. Call them, went clicked every button on their automated system could not get to a real life person.
Ridiculous.
So that's an example of where there's a really great documentary called Cuba and the Camera Guy. And it's about this camera guy who goes to Cuba multiple times over the course of 20 years. And every time he goes back, he finds the same people and he interviews them from the time that he interviews his kid, and then he comes back 20 years later, he's an adult, he has kids, all this stuff. So he demonstrates like how Cuba has kind of changed and how communism has affected Cuba. And at one point he interviews these guys that are building a building. And they're like, he's asking them like, how long have you been building this building? And they're like, oh, it's been like a couple of years, because there's no incentive to finish the building. Yeah. He goes to the grocery store, that they're out of everything. They don't have eggs or anything, but there's still 3 people working and they're just kind of standing around. So that's an example of like when you introduce, too much government involved, because communism is an example of the government's involved in every aspect of money. They decide how many eggs you get and what job you do and all these different things. There's no efficiency when the government is too involved. That's why I like Elon's idea of creating an government efficiency sector,
regulation,
because there's so much waste, and that is a big source of the problems with the debt deficit and obviously the military and stuff like that. So I think for a capitalist society to thrive like the US, like I wouldn't have been able to be an entrepreneur and start all these businesses if the government wasn't involved in money to some degree, because we probably would have started.
Yeah. So hold on. I want to jump in here really quick. And then I want to ask you a direct question. Yeah. So as the system is created, government assistance over time, it's become inflated. There's a time, and I'll get to the question in a moment, but first I want to say government is the worst allocators of capital on the planet, right? Every single, name one, I just dare you, one well-run government institution.
I would say the post office is the only one that actually pays for itself. Well, and even the post office, everybody.
UPS and FedEx, bro. Mail yourself. Would you be comfortable mailing yourself a $5,000 check?
No,
not from the post office. Hell no.
Pay for itself. Like, is it profitable?
So with that. So like we were talking about loans, and I think the loan one is a really interesting conversation, because you're right that people wouldn't be able to get loans without certain assistance. But look what happened when the government started backing loans in 2010. You guys familiar with that? Like, that's when all of the admin fees, that's when everything.
The postal office is a self-sufficient. This is from the post office, so I don't know if you can trust it, but the postal office is a self-sufficient agency and is not funded by appropriations.
I don't even know what that means. What does that even mean?
Is it profitable? Does it pay for itself, or is it?
It operates as an independent agency of the federal government, designed to cover its costs through its services, primarily by selling postage and related products. However, it has struggled with financial challenges in recent years.
Because it's bloated.
Partly due to declining mail volume, statutory obligations such as pre-funding retiree benefits.
Does it operate
giving away free money?
A deficit.
While UPS does generate significant revenue, it often runs in a deficit.
There you go. Yeah.
So
that was the closest example.
They're poor allocators of capital. I don't think, if you question that, then like just do some research and think about the DMV and post office. Yeah. Sounds like you're making an argument that hard money, Bitcoin in a sense, with no government involvement would solve this. Though there's a third, I'm not saying that will, hold on, there's a third dimension here that has not been brought to the table. That is my true passion in life, that nothing will get solved if we don't fundamentally reform how we educate our children. Education to me is the single biggest tipping and inflection point that would change everything. Because you can ask 99%, even people watching this podcast, how do you guys make decisions? What's your decision-making criteria? Most of them are just going to stare you down. They don't have a decision-making criteria. How do you learn? Do you know how to, have you ever learned how to learn?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever learned how to control your emotions?
Yep.
Have you ever learned how to, balance a checkbook? Do you even know the difference between APR and APY? All the fundamental skills that we have been able to kind of learn and pick up just because we opened books and got in different rooms and mentors and stuff like that, learned outside of the traditional educational model. Until we bring that stuff in, I don't know that any system is going to make a difference, because people are going to end up dumb and, they don't know what drives value, and they're going to sit there thinking they're pushing registers, and they're going to go on strike because they should be getting more paid as a cashier and they're not being paid enough money. They don't understand the difference between value and what replaceable stuff like that is. So like, that's just a third dimension that I wanted to inject in the conversation, because without that, I don't think any of it matters, because to me, that's the only way to change the world, is to change fundamentally how we actually train.
So that's good. Why is the education system broken though?
It's government formed. And I mean, you're probably familiar with what Carnegie said, right? Now, I don't know if this is an actual quote from Carnegie or not, right? I don't know. But if you look up Carnegie, he says, I'm here to build a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers.
Was
right?
it Carnegie or Rockefeller?
I think it was Carnegie.
It was Carnegie, okay.
Yeah. So and I'll just give a couple other examples on this, because I think that getting these on the table is really important and it limits people. So what is the worst possible thing that can happen to you when you're in elementary school or middle school or high school? You fail a class. What's the most important thing you need to be able to do to succeed and actually go places in life? Fail.
Yep.
But it's our biggest fear.
Yep.
Another example of this, and I don't know, not every school takes this. I'm curious if you had this as well at the SAT. I didn't come from the neighborhood you came from. SATs. What SATs teach you? There's only one correct answer. In life, in business, in any situation, is there ever one correct answer?
No.
Only
Rarely.
in like advanced mathematics.
Rarely, yeah.
I'm talking about how to solve a problem, right?
Yeah.
Mathematics, right? And so we're not taught to think creatively, right? In the end, there's no one correct answer. There's no one best way to build a business. It's a continuum, right? It's there's the most correct or there's the worst, right? Yeah. And so these little things that are not taught in society, like how values derived, how to think, how to control your emotions, without that, I don't see how we ever get to a point where we can even install a system. You know what I mean? And
good.
Now, I was going to say, I just want to inject that in the conversation. We're talking that. The other question I have for you, because it sounds like coming from a very libertarian viewpoint, which I tend to lean very libertarian. Do you believe in any government regulation?
Yes.
Okay. I do too. Limited. Yeah. I'm not one of those people who said no regulation.
The FAA regulates airplanes and pilots' licenses and shit. We need stuff.
I agree. That's why I wanted to ask, how far down the line do you go with it?
But money is, I don't think the government should be involved in money. And quickly, because I want to come back to your thing here that'll bring full circle. Do you think that the government should be the one educating people though?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So the reason that our education system is broken is because of the money, right? Because the only reason that the government has control to make people dumb and to brainwash people and to literally do 12 years of propaganda, in my eyes, the reason that the education system is broken is because the government got involved. And because the government got involved, the only reason they were able to get involved was because they can print money and they can just fund it. Right? They just fund everything, right? So if they want something, it's we'll just withhold funding. That is their move, right? And so my mom is very, very passionate about jab. I don't want to be censored too much, but the whole jab and information around that, right? And she's
pro jab or anti jab?
Choice and access to information and choice and not being mandated, right? Not pro, not anti, just getting, right? And for those that are injured, hearing their stories, whatever, right? But she's how are we going to fight big pharma, or how are we going to fight? I'm you can't until you take away their supply of energy. They have unlimited energy. They have unlimited resources because they have unlimited money, right? Because the government and the big pharma, it's all one. They just get money. It's 2008, everything crashes, the banks, they just bail them out, give them money, right? So my thinking of this is the reason I agree with you, education, 100%, most important thing. Absolutely. And and who should be doing that? Because it's not the government, right? And so coming back to your question, I think this is that sets it up well, which is when we talk about the concept of the government should be involved with this, or whether it was, welfare, which, by the way, I've updated my stance. In a fiat system, I think we should have welfare. I think that I am pro government, being involved in helping people in a fiat system. But do you think, to your point with allocation, do you think that there's any issue that the government should solve that the private sector could not solve better, or period?
I would say there's most issues the private sector can. The last time I came on here, I talked about how we should have privatized police. And that's a crazy idea for a lot of people. But if police officers, for example, the agency as a whole was incentivized with funding based on response time, resolution of complaints, not receiving complaints, and they were docked when those things happened, then they would run more efficiently if it was owned by a corporation. But that introduces corruption, right? Major corruption, to where okay, if I own this corporation, who's going to police me? Who's going to police the police? Who's going to police
the government? Right.
So it there's a point where too much capitalism actually makes things worse.
When you say capitalism, do you mean the free market?
Yeah. So here's a perfect example. You worked with chiropractors. You've seen people who work with dentists, dental clients. I think that at this point, more dentist offices actually makes the quality of care worse, because up until a certain point, like let's say there's no dentist, one dentist in your town, that's amazing. Like now everybody has access to dental care. 2 dentists, great. Now there's competition to drive it down. But in Denver, there's a dentist on every corner. So what does that introduce? Now there's a saturation of dentists. Now they have to do procedures that people don't really need in order to stay alive. They're pushing root canals. They're pushing implants to people that don't really need them. More dentists is actually going to make the system worse, because now it's an excess of capitalism to the point where things that aren't needed are now being prescribed for the sake of making money, for the sake of just staying alive. And you see the same thing.
Why are they able to, like, do you think that, like, is that truly the free market? Like, because of like, how are they able to offer all these services? Because I feel like it's through funding, right?
How do they know? Let's use a dentist example, because it's an interesting conversation, because I somewhat agree that there is an end to capitalism, but it's usually crony capitalism, and it's usually when the government gets involved that capitalism becomes ugly.
Right here. Yeah, where we're at for sure.
With that, how do the people who are getting the root canals that they don't need, how do they know about that?
There's the whole, if you look into it, it's a whole thing online.
So are they getting reviews with it? So like, I think that 100 years ago, we needed child labor laws, for example, right? Like we needed certain stuff because the Rockefellers, they were going to run, you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
But when the age of the internet, theoretically, if a dentist was known to start overcharging and doing things that were unnecessary, enough reviews would drive it down so no one would go to that dentist, and they go out of business, placing them out, right?
Maybe eventually, but there's other problems, not just prescribing things that aren't needed, like the whole thing with people coming in versus having insurance versus not having insurance. Now they want to serve the people that that don't have insurance, so that creates little games that maybe drive up prices and stuff like that as well. So I think at a certain point, like the need for competition starts to harm the consumer. Another good example is like Amazon. So Amazon has a huge antitrust problem. The government's tried to break them up, but they just really can't even figure out like what Amazon really is to be able to break it up, or how they'd break it up. But it's an example of like Amazon came out, it was great for everybody. And then once they got big enough, now they're like, hey, you're selling this paintball gun. I'm just going to go directly to the manufacturer and cut you out completely. And, for the sake of our benefit and just to continue to grow. So there could be an argument made that like maybe Amazon does need to be broken up, or maybe Google needs to be broken up, because now they have so much influence over elections and search results and stuff like that, to where there's a threshold that was passed where Google went from being great for everybody to great for most people to great for a select few.
So I think the fundamental thing that I think about things differently with, and I want to go into this because it comes back to both of these issues, is, and I could be wrong on this, right? Is I go, the introduction of credit or of debt, okay? If someone didn't have a credit card, right? They literally just had the money in their bank account. And if they were out, they were out. And there was no government program to be like, oh, it's incentives for the dentist thing, for example. Then like they're not going to be buying things that they don't need, because they can't, because they have a fixed amount. Once they're out of money, and they're going to start with the things that are the most prioritized.
100%.
Right? So now apply this to the Amazon thing, for example. Why was Amazon, and by the way, I love Amazon, right? Like friggin' dude, I spend more money on Amazon than anything else, right? Like I have it all shipped to my door, right? But why was Amazon or Google or Facebook or whatever, why were they able to go and grow so quickly? Was because of debt, right? Like they literally took on lots and lots and lots of debt. They get funding and all the different things, and they're selling to people, and a lot of people buy stuff from these people on credit cards, debt. And so debt seems to, remember that drug we were talking about? It's like you take the drug and it's like, debt is the drug, right? And it's, if I can borrow into the future of something and I can like use it now, I'm setting myself up for a bad future. But that was only made available because the money system isn't real, right? Because the money system allowed for debt, because money is debt. We create it.
So it's a double-edged sword, bro.
Right.
Because without debt, we're not sitting in this house.
Exactly. So I was going to say,
so
the reason why America is so prosperous is largely in part because of debt.
100%.
Because if the government's backing a mortgage, that's what keeps interest rates low.
100%.
Mortgage money's pumped into society. That money's then spent in other different places. I used to do taxes. We process millions in tax refunds. Tax refunds, for most people, is not actually a refund of your own money. It's a government credit that you have for making under a certain threshold and having like 2 or 3 kids. So I'd have somebody who made $20,000 all year, but they have 4 kids. The government's like, we're going to give you 15 grand to sustain yourself for the rest of the year. And that 15 grand then goes into the economy, gets spent at.
Yeah. Okay. But yes, I agree with you. Okay. So but back up really quick. So I agree that debt is what's allowed for this, right? I'm not anti-debt, by the way, right? I mean, consumer debt, I'm like, it's dumb, but whatever, right? I'm not anti-debt. My point is that when you borrow money, period, anytime something is borrowed, you are taking from the future and doing it now. And the only way that someone doesn't lose, and there is a scenario, the only way that someone doesn't lose there is if more value, prosperity is created than the debt that was borrowed, right? Because if there's not a fixed amount of value in the world, right? You can create it. And so as long as the person that is borrowing and the parties that are involved, that the debt is used correctly to create economic prosperity, then everyone wins. But once that the can is opened, right? It's like, that's how it has to be maintained. Because if I borrow from you, right, and I spend it foolishly, then either I lose, right, or you lose because I don't pay it back, and that scale, right? So I go, the only way it works is if the person or entity that is involved with that is good at loaning and is good at and when you have the government being the entity that's involved in the money, that is to your point, they're the worst entity in the history for money allocation, for efficiency, for whatever. So you have the worst possible entity controlling all of the debt, loaning it to people that have no education about the whole process of it, to where they're just buying random things for their mouth. So this whole entire thing is propped up, designed to screw everyone over because we're using the money dumb. And so I go, I think debt is possible, and to do it healthy in a private sector world, where the money that is being loaned doesn't come from the government. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I mean, there's regulations around like payday loans, for example, because if there's regulations around mortgages and what you can charge, there's regulations around credit card interest rates. If it was just all private sector, a lot of people would be taken advantage of consistently.
Yeah, in the current fiat system, yes. But I'm talking, sorry, let me take one step back. If you were to have a hard money supply where the government was not involved in money at all, bring all the way back to the question that we were talking about was, I think that the private sector with hard money, like true capitalistic society, private sector with hard money, not fake fiat money, I think that it could solve every single problem that the government could solve, or that the government attempts to solve, in a way more efficient manner and more morally ethical, where everybody wins and there's not corruption.
How would you maintain roads, for example?
Okay, so if you have the private sector having hard money and people are incentivized by rewards, the private sector will figure out a way to go and build and develop technology, because they're the ones that are going to get rewarded. And does the fact that roads exist help business?
Let me ask you a question on this.
Yeah. So
are HOAs government?
No.
Same like HOAs.
Fuck HOAs.
I say fuck HOAs, but that's what would need to be created in essence. Because
but then it essentially just gets back to the same thing in a roundabout way, where the HOA operates like a government.
It does. I agree, 100%.
Like, it's inefficient. People hate them. They have useless rules. Like,
but so anytime you have an entity, so that's why I think I don't think you should have non-for-profits and government agencies. I think everything should be run as a business, because if you're remember when you were talking about like the private police sector where you're incentivized with, having to be, I'm like, that's business, right? If you're good at business, then you're going to make money. Like, look at Elon, right? And so my thinking is that the role that the government, if you were to remove what could be solved by the private sector, the only real role that the government would have would be a morality police. Now, we have to have like we have to have some form of structure. We're not going to go down far the rabbit hole with blockchain, but you have to have some form of entity that, like make sure people don't kill people, or there's a justice system, let's say, right? So I understand the government being involved there in like a justice system thing, but take that part out of it. If every other thing was run where people that ran it best were incentivized to run it better and the capital allocation went there, then it would be very hard to corrupt because they couldn't get fake money if people stopped paying into it. Does that make sense?
Humans will always revert back to government, though. Like, have you guys read Lord of the Flies?
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Like, so essentially, I was in high school, maybe, but
hierarchies.
You probably remember more than I do, but these kids like crash in it's a fictional story. These kids crash on a desert island, and they're kids like 10, 12. And essentially, it's a story of like what happens once they crash on the desert island. They establish essentially a government. Like there's a hierarchy. They end up like committing murder. They start establishing like ways and roles in society for things to get done. Essentially, it just became a government. Like we will always revert back to a government. That's why every single civilization throughout history has always had a government.
Yeah. And I agree. And I think that government can exist without being involved in money. And I think that if you removed them from the money system, then that would force the government to have to run efficiently, right? And then the private sector would take care of everything else.
Yeah, because one thing we haven't said here is what if the government was just profitable based off all the fucking tax dollars they take? I think it was Buffett, Uncle Warren. It was like, hey, you want me to fix the government debt problem in 2 days? Just make it so that Congress doesn't get paid if they're in debt.
Yeah.
And then they could contribute, because the roads one and keeping things up is a difficult thing. It's something I've thought about before. And it's not that I'm anti-taxes. I'm anti-wasteful fucking spending.
Right. If you had a vote with
my neighborhood in Florida, Boynton Beach, clean, love it. Hell, even most of the state of Florida. I know some people might live in areas of Florida that are whack jobs, and there is some wacky shit, right? But it's clean. Like they take care of stuff. The police show up. They prosecute theft. I'm okay with giving some money to make sure that actually gets allocated and runs effectively, right? Okay. It's like, what if the government? Because I don't think the government should be able to print money. But what the role of the government? Like, I don't think it's a bad idea for the government, especially with how we're designed with 50 states, to help hold the states together, help with some infrastructure. The police one's a really interesting conversation because that can go multiple ways, like privatizing police, police and military, but even then how like there's so much privatization taking place in the military with how much money gets spent going back and forth with stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like, it's a really huge conglomerate, but I do think it should be there to protect the citizens as a whole. Right. Right. And to your point with the hierarchies, and one of the, I don't want to say challenges that I see in a world that is, like purely Bitcoin based, but in general is humans are always going to resort to hierarchies. This is not just a human thing. This is actually seen in many other species as well too. Right. And we're always going to have it. So somebody needs to have like top say. You guys have business.
Bro, even my dog, like my dog and my business partner's dog, when we put out water for them, his dog is smaller, female. My dog's male, a little bit bigger. She'll sit and watch him drink until he's done, and she just knows. And then once he's done, she'll go and drink. Like they have a hierarchy within.
100%. You see it everywhere. The lions runs the pride, right? Like, I mean, there's the leader of the wolves. The question is, how do you get to a point where we can do that, where it's not like literally in your face, pissing away all the money that you give and just being completely wasteful and ridiculous, right? Because that's the point we're at now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Why do you think it is that we have hierarchy?
Human nature.
Human nature.
It's being nature.
Yeah. Because it's not just, we have consciousness, right? As far as we know, what separates us from other living species is our ability to think and be creative and think in the future and not just in the moment. But if you just see animals behave, I love nature shows and watching that type of stuff. You know what I mean? But they operate within hierarchy still, and they still organize by it. So why do we do it? It's a great freaking question. And as someone who's watched many teams, and I've had many, many employees, and I've watched the employees go about, and it's like one thing I've learned over time is that if somebody's not responsible for something getting done, even if they're all on the same team, then nothing gets done. Yep. And so I've watched it take place. Yep. So I don't know why we do hierarchies, but
do you so in nature, I think that's an interesting thing. So I want to take this back to structural thing, and we'll pivot the conversation here a little bit because we'll go into the more philosophical thing here, right? Because I think that was a good setup for my belief is that well, I'll transition it with this thought. God in the Bible, or the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. All right. So if God is good, right, and the opposite of good is evil, right, then the love of money would mean that the love of that would mean that that's a reflection of what is evil, right? So money being power, right? Because that's what it is. Money is energy, is power. You have the ability. The more money you have, the more power you have, and people are obsessed with that, right?
How would you define power?
It's not just my authority, but it's actually my ability to execute that authority, or influence, via whatever the mechanism is. Like money is power because, man, that's a good question. How would I explain that? How would you describe it?
So the best way I've ever heard it described is it's the ability to close your eyes and envision a world, open your eyes and make that world happen.
Okay, so
right.
from a philosophical standpoint,
and the reason why I wanted to define power is because that's my definition of power and how I choose to use it. You're using it, and that's what I wanted to get into is like from an authority standpoint and control over people and being able to push them in a lot of ways, which isn't bad. I just want to make sure defining it terms.
So I don't think power is bad, but the love of money, if the love of money is the root of all evil, and we live in an inherently fallen world, right? Do you believe that people are inherently good, inherently bad, or inherently neutral, or fallen?
I think that good, evil, and neutral are all perspectives.
Okay, so do you believe in good and bad?
I have my own beliefs on it, but then again, if I say that, and I think we've been on this on a long ago podcast I shot down years ago, right? I think that events take place and multiple people can observe the same event and have completely different reactions.
Right, but like, do you believe that there is let me ask this. Do you believe there's an objective moral law?
So I don't know that I would call it objective moral law. I will tell you what I believe in is good, and that is that which supports life, right? And so that's my personal belief. Okay. Now, with that said, I feel that if I'm like, hey, I'm the definer between good and evil, and I know that...
Right, now you're the definer of it, but like the concept of good and evil, good, bad does exist, right? Okay, great.
In the eye of the beholder.
Right. Okay, that's great. So back to the power thing, if when I was trying to describe power I was thinking of it like electricity, for example, right? It's like I could have all of the structure and the wires and everything like that, but it's like nothing moves if there's not power like going through it, right? And so power is not just authority. It's not just assets. It's like the ability to, and I like how you said it, it's like the ability to actually make it happen. Like power requires movement. It requires, like energy, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So shifting gears into then the philosophical thing of hierarchy. So humans are above animals in the hierarchy of like nature. Yes?
Top of the food chain.
Top of the food chain, right? Does the hierarchy exist simply because because of a power structure hierarchy? Or do you think that hierarchy exists because of something besides that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a lot of ways you can go with this and a lot of theories that I've read about it. But to me, what would make sense is that hierarchy is ingrained within us because it was the only way we were able to survive hundreds of thousands of years ago. We had to form tribes. It's why tribalism still runs so deep in the blood today and why we have so many issues, right? Yeah. Like I think tribalism is a really nasty way to live. And it's just like, oh, because that imaginary border was designed over there, I now hate you.
Sports is the greatest example.
Yeah.
And I love sports, by the way. But
it's interesting seeing how it's like my country versus your country. Then it's my city versus your city. Then even at the high school level, it's like my part of the city versus your part of the city. And you can go smaller and smaller and smaller.
Do you believe that humans have free will?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Do you believe that humans have free will?
To an extent.
Okay. So do you think that if the concept of, or the concept of choice, right? So I'm going to talk about this from a biblical perspective, which is when God created the earth, he gave man free will because he gave them the choice to either accept him or reject him, right? So when the concept of choice was introduced, that opened up the ability for there to be hierarchy. Because if there were no choice and everything just was, you were just a robot thing. Like, is this robot any better than this? So, does that make sense?
Yeah, let me throw something out there. I heard the other day, I think it was Brian Skinner, famous, I think, psychologist or something. He said, have you heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink?
Yes.
Do you know what this other guy said? This psychologist, he's like, you're damn right I can make him drink. You want to know how? I'm going to starve him for multiple days. I'm going to feed him salt. I'm going to put it on his lips.
Yep.
I'm going to do this, and I'm going to deprive him of water.
Yes.
Guarantee I can get him to drink.
Yep.
And so that was really interesting to me in regards to this idea of free choice and will.
Right.
It's like there's certain conditions that might take place
Right.
where for self-preservation might overdo choice, you know?
Right.
And so I think about that even in just everyday choices, because what are we, at the end of the day, what's the brain always trying to do? Protect us, self-preserve, you know? And so anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there as far as like the free choice argument, you know, because like.
But hypothetically, like if I were to be like, you have to do this podcast. And you're like, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to beat you. And you'd be like, no. And then I'm going to this. And I could eventually go and I could offer, I'm going to kill you. And you could say, no, that you have a choice to reject. I mean, the animal doesn't have it because it just doesn't understand that. But as humans, right, that ability, you could continue to reject, right? Now, obviously there's devices where they could physically go, but like, you see what I'm saying? Yep. So if that's the case, to me, the reason that hierarchy is able to exist is because of choice, and because there is choice, that allows for there to be different levels of things, right? Like, or different levels of like intelligence, or people wanting to go, like the example with the kids on the island, right? It's like people having, like, there's a higher or a lower thing because of how that person chooses to live, right? Or how the choices that they choose to make. That is what would allow for that to happen. I don't know if that's where it comes from, but would you agree with that assessment? Yeah. Sure. Okay. So then if choice is what allows for hierarchy, and we have this world that we live in where there's billions of people, right? And everyone has some form of choice. What do you believe is what makes humans more valuable than animals or things lower on the food chain? Is there an objective thing that gives that makes human life inherently more valuable than animals?
Inherently more valuable?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting argument in regards to inherently more valuable, but in regards to getting to the top of the food chain, because I almost think those are like two different questions to an extent. The ability to think long term. Like, I think that's really what it all comes down to. And honestly, the more I get around the wealthiest people, the biggest civilizations, it's the people with the longest term thinking that are able to save today for a better tomorrow, or make a decision today for a better tomorrow, are going to create and be able to take over. Right. Okay. And so like the human was able to figure out how to conserve energy, and they figured out that if they played these certain games with the animals, they could figure out how to get ahead of them. Right. Because they could think long term. Oh, I can follow this guy for 5 days, and when he's asleep, I can do this.
Okay. Okay.
You know?
That's super interesting. So then, do you think that, so then are you saying that the value of humans is instilled by like their ability to think into the future? Is that what you're saying? Like,
I'm saying that's why I believe they're on top of the food chain. Yeah.
So thought, like intelligence, consciousness is where value is.
As far as we know, we're the only ones conscious. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, am I going to say that I would place a dog's life? Like, if you're talking about like value of life, like I'm going to put a chicken's life versus a human's, I'm not. Right.
Right. Because human has more thought.
I mean, human has more thought, and there's also the food chain. And honestly, like if you watch animals, it's very violent out there too. Right. You know what I mean? So like we got to eat. Like,
so it is intelligence in your head. And I'm not trying to get at anything here. I'm just curious with this. In intelligence or thought or consciousness, where does AI play into that? Because like if thought, or at least the ability to think in the future, data, is consciousness separate from data? Like, if AI became an entity and was a robot and it could think for itself, I guess it really doesn't though, because it's all. Do you believe that consciousness can only exist in humans?
I'm hesitant to say that I fully believe in almost anything, because like I look up stars in the universe, I'm like, I don't know shit, right? I think that right now where AI stands, they lack the empathy and the internal compassion and emotions that typically drive, and creativity that drive new human behavior. Do I think we can get to the point where the AI can creative? Yeah.
So do you think that,
sure.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on this too. You've got NFTs, right? Which are non-fungible, so it's trackable. And you have AI, which is artificial intelligence, right? Could you do to the point where you could take artificial intelligence and tie it to a specific AI so it's identifiable, so that there's an identity to it? If you had AI that thought for itself tied to a unique thing in the digital landscape, right? Like that would be life. Like that you could have like actual life in the form of like a computer?
It depends on how we would define life.
How do you define life?
It's a good question.
How do you define life?
I would say the ability to, I think a heartbeat, just on a basic level, like containing a heartbeat, ability to think long-term, ability to experience emotion. There's nothing that has life that doesn't experience emotions. So I think on a basic level, I think the emotion part of it is a big part of it.
That's interesting. Okay. That makes sense.
To your point, though, I think AI is going to take over. I mean, I saw this article the other day that's like humans are going to have more sex with robots by the year 2030 than they are with other humans. It's at 2030. And I'm like, geez, that's like only 6 years.
That makes that is. So then what do you make of all this? Meaning, like, you've got, because the question that I feel like the reason I end up on religion, and people know my stance, and I mean, you know this, like I believe in Jesus, and I believe that there's a reason though that I believe in the Bible, and there's a reason that I've come to that conclusion. But I think it starts with this question of like, you walk outside, you look around, you experience life and the emotions, and you see the beauty of it all, and you see humans, and you see all this, the stars, and you see all the potential and the horrible things that happen and the good things that happen, and it's like, dude, your life. Alex Hormozy's famous thing is like, bro, you're gonna die and no one's gonna remember you, right? Like you're gonna be like, people will just forget. Who cares, right? And that's kind of in his way, it's a positive outlook or a good way to look at life. That's a good thing, but right. But I go, to me, life has to have some form of meaning, right? And it's like, so how do you decide if you've lived a good, meaningful, fulfilling life? What do you think is your purpose and meaning here on this earth? Right? Because it's like, we all live in a world where, like, if we really put our minds to it, like, we could, like, money is just digits, right? Like, we understand that concept. I mean, you go, you build a company, you exit, you do it again, you do it again, you do it again, you make $1 million, $2 billion, $10 billion, whatever, right? Like, who cares at that point, right? It's just for the sake of growth. So, like, how do you make decisions on, or like, I'm sorry, not decisions. What do you think is the meaning of this human experience?
What do I think is the meaning of it? It's a great question. Yeah. Like, because you asked, like, how would I view a successful life and purpose? And those, I look at those a little bit differently. I'll start with the successful one because
actually, no, start with purpose.
The purpose.
Yeah,
one?
Start with purpose. Like, what do you think your purpose here is?
So the way I look at purpose is come here and support life. And what I mean by that is basically any person I interact with, they walk away better, feel internally myself. I'm a big believer in like the internal energy you have is felt. And this also ties into my this is new for me over the last couple of years version of success. It's how many moments did I live in peace? Right. And I'm not talking like peace, like I'm going to go get stoned or something like that. And I'm watching Elon right here, stoned in the picture, right? It's more of how can I still the waters of the mind while still going out and doing things that I find enjoyable that are going to provide purpose to the world, right? So that doesn't mean I'm going to sit in the mountains of Tibet and meditate all day, which although I would love to do that for like a month and see what happens, right? Yeah, I would love to. Yeah. But for me, all I'm optimizing for is peace within or freedom from, right? Freedom from the mind, right? And I see it happen, and I spend an enormous amount of time watching and observing my thoughts and watching other people's behaviors. And the lack of emotional regulation that most people have is very disturbing, and I just feel for them. Because going back to this whole idea of good and bad and evil, when you start judging things with those terminologies, you're setting yourself up to feel internal turmoil. Because you're going to look at an event, and you're like, that's bad. And that's going to make you feel bad, even if you have no control over the external event. And that's going to disrupt the internal peace that you have. So I do my best to release judgment on events that take place because
could you label something as bad and know that it is bad, but like keep it at a distance and not let it affect you, even though you label
absolutely
it as bad?
You can look at something and be like, yep, I don't want that to happen. But then the question is, what's next, right? What are we going to do next? How are we going to react to the situation? Right. Because events just happen. It's our reaction to the event that takes place. Where most people, in my observation, get tripped up and say, hold on to things. This shouldn't be this way. I'm only going to be happy when I can do this. Right. And all these conditions that need to be met before you can feel something really holds us back, Yeah. And I know that I hate the fucking term privilege. I will say, tying this back to money, that until you get to a point where like money's not the number one driver and you're worried about something,
Yeah.
I understand that that's kind of a challenging thing to feel.
Yeah.
You know, it would be very hard, and I can't say that I was there prior to it. Not like I'm getting rich or, you know,
Right.
FU money rich or anything. So that's what I mean. That's all I'm after. That's what I'm about. And the more human beings that I can spread that to, the better. That's what I see as my purpose, honestly, in a lot of ways. Like I just want to help emotional, and this goes back to educating kids. My lifelong dream is to actually be the charter school or privatized school that actually fundamentally treats kids the right way. And I also think with the advent of the internet and with Starlink taking place and the internet becoming available, oh my God, there's stuff that they just did in freaking Asheville. Oh my gosh. Like, I think that is possible because education is going to cost very little money. It's going to cost a computer and an internet connection in the future, you know? So,
Okay. So what would it take? I'm going to ask you this first. I'm going to come back to you on it. Okay. Someone asked me, I was on a podcast one time, this was a couple years ago, and they were like, what would it like? They're like, Josh, you believe in Jesus? I'm like, yes. And they're like, okay. What would it take for you to not believe in Jesus? Like, what would it take for you to update your belief system? Right. And I'm like, that's a really good question. So you have come to this conclusion that this is what it is and where you're hesitant for good and bad or whatever. Let's pretend that there's this world, that the world that we're living in, let's pretend that there is objective good and objective bad. Let's pretend that exists for a second. It might not, but let's just pretend. Okay. And you are currently in your state where you're like, not really sure, right? Or like, I'm hesitant to label that. What would it take? What evidence would you need? I don't know. I'm asking you. I'm supposed to be asking you, but like I'm going to ask you because I'm down the rabbit hole. Okay. Like what evidence would you need, or what would it take for you to update your belief system about whether it's religion and it be Jesus, or whether it be the fact that there's good and evil, or whether it's whatever the thing is? Like how do you update your belief system on these big philosophical life questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think and reflect on them all the time. I draw from different sources across the board as far as I love listening and studying philosophy, intellectual stuff, think about it quite often. And I honestly just walk around and observe how my internal place takes place. And over time, so I reflect, observation through learning, through thinking, through studying. Right. Okay. And so, and I've updated the belief system many times.
So like a scientific approach.
Yeah. Scientific. In a way, yes,
okay.
Like definitely. There's an art to it too, I would say, you know, because some of it's emotional related, like, I'd rather feel like this than that. It's kind of like, I don't like this. I like this. I'm going to go try and optimize for this. But even if this that I didn't like happened, then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What would it take for me to update my belief system?
Yeah. On things that are not verifiably provable. Like, for example, good and evil, like morality. Does morality exist, or is it objective? Is God real or not?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say for most people, it's purely through feelings. And I actually had this kind of epiphany about a few weeks ago where I was like, you operate your life off of your feelings. Like, I want to build a bigger business. I want to get rich. I want to have a 6-pack. I want to buy this car. And it's incredibly untrustworthy because your feelings always change. Like, I'm feeling normal right now. If you slap me, I would feel rage, right? So I'm sitting in the same place. I'm the same person. One action changes my feelings. So I've tried to get away from how I feel about things all the time as my one true source of making decisions, which is also why I've been like reading the Bible lately and like texting you all the time, like all these questions, because I'm like, if anything, like this is a book that has not changed in 2000 plus years. Right. So, or eat more because
what do you mean say has not changed? Like, what do you mean?
The text has not changed. It's been the same. Right. So it says, thou shalt not kill.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying.
An example is like that. Thou shalt not kill. Like, okay, if I read that, I believe that, I'm like, I'm going to stick to that. If I'm enraged and I feel like I should murder somebody right now, my feelings are telling me murder that person. But because this covenant has told me not to, I'm choosing to trust that instead. So I would say, not feelings is one. So I try to just remove the feelings from it. And then a lot of what Nick said, like observation, studying, talking to people. Like how many times have we heard Hormozy say something and it's like rewired how you think about something or how you approach a certain problem. So I'd say thinking, talking to people, evaluating outcomes as well. And then looking at the things that actually bring value, like into your life. Like I've tried every single thing that you can imagine to like be happy. I've tried getting rich. I've tried getting jacked. I've tried getting famous. I've tried, every single worldly thing.
Yeah.
And none of those have brought a feeling of fulfillment. But when I help other people, or when I do something that's like that, when no one's watching, that genuinely feels like that's the act of a good person, I think that brings purpose and fulfillment for me, at least. So I would say serving others, doing the best that I can, just knowing that like I gave it 100%, and then just genuinely trying to be a good person.
Okay. That makes sense. When you say that you don't make it based on feelings, and again, I'm not having an agenda here.
On that note, you're always going to make decisions emotionally. Like,
well, right. But like you were saying, you're trying to remove the emotion from it. And then you were like, it feels good to help somebody.
Well, the emotions are not trustworthy. So I'm not trying to build the purpose off of the emotion, because that's where people go down the road of like idolatry with Lamborghinis and Rolexes and APs and partying and clubbing. It's all about like feeling good in the moment and just short-term pleasure. So I think that feelings are never going to be like 100% removed from anything, but experiencing fulfillment, I guess that could be a feeling, but it's not something that you can get through, just operating blindly.
That makes sense. Okay. So that's interesting. Cool. All right. And we could go deeper down that road, but like, yeah. Do you have any questions?
No, I mean, I love it. One thing I would add to that, because I agree, most people make very emotional based decisions, and I'm not saying I have no emotions, right?
Yeah.
Of course I do. But I have learned to separate myself from the emotions, especially in charged up moments,
Yeah.
I believe I've gotten very good at that. I'm still working on it. But it's something I've practiced for the last decade. I'm very patient at all times, and I look at things for what it is, right?
Some of that, dude.
So like I'll give you an example of this, right? I'll ask somebody like, would you consider yourself logical?
Yeah.
All right. Most people say yes immediately.
Yeah.
All right. Without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'll do this after somebody's really pissed about something that's taken place.
Yeah.
I'm like, do you consider, okay, how logical do you think it is to be angry about something that happened yesterday that you can do nothing about now? Is that logical? And then they'll be like, shit. Right. And so like I use frames like that to catch myself if I do ever start going down like the wrong rabbit hole with stuff. You know what I mean? And then you brought up fulfillment a little bit, which I think is super important. You're right. More money doesn't bring you what you want. We hear it all the time from everyone, right? Like more money doesn't bring you what you want, fame, all that stuff, right? There is a certain level of internal bar of raising of peace within that it does. Like there's no question about that, especially once you get above a certain line. But the fulfillment thing that I've found, and I think it was Helen Keller who said this, I don't know where I got this from, but it's like in life, either everything is a miracle or nothing is all. And so I literally look at
nothing is what?
Or nothing is at all. Right. And so every time I wake up, and people joke, but I'm like, man, thank God, another day. Let's go, baby. I'll walk outside. I'll hear the birds chirp. I'm like, what's up, dudes? Like, what's going on? Semel, she's not here right now, but it's the same thing I do. I look at everything as absolutely beautiful, eye-opening, inspiring, and I get super intrigued by everywhere you go. Right. Because we tend as humans, we'll see a tree, for example, right? A tree. And then we'll just lump it up with every other tree that we see. But if we actually thought about it, every single tree is unique. Every single tree is beautiful in a different way. And I know I sound like, Eastern philosopher person who I've pulled a tremendous amount from Eastern philosophy. And it's brought tremendous amount of peace over the last decade from studying it. But I just look at everything as a miracle, every little thing. And I get excited about everything. Right. And I truly learned like the beauty, the joy, the happiness, it's in the little moments. It's not really ever the big monumental things, right? The 100K day or whatever. Like those things are cool, but then the next day it's like, all right, let's go to the next thing. You know what I mean? And so like for fulfillment, for me, it's just looking at everything as a beautiful and a miracle, like, because I believe it is.
Oh, so that's how you feel. Okay, I see what you're saying.
That's just kind of an outlook. That's just a frame that I look through things, right? And interestingly enough, we've brought up Hormozy here, and Hormozy has a very nihilistic, viewpoint on life. But depending on how you interpret his viewpoint, it's actually extraordinarily powerful frame to let go of all this baggage that you're holding on to and being afraid to start stuff,
Yeah.
And so like, I probably would defer a little bit in regards to like the internal peace and feelings and some of that type of stuff than he has, but I can totally adopt his framework in many other areas of life. And I find it super empowering.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're married, you're in serious relationship, probably will get married. Are you planning on having kids?
Yes.
Yes. Got it. Yep. You planning on having kids? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that a man's responsibility is first to his family, or first to himself, his family, and then society, like in that order?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There's nuance, but in general, yes.
In general, yes.
There's everything is context. Nothing is black and white. But yes, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your wife, which means you can't take care of the kid. So yes, you got to take care of yourself. Like you know, Jordan Peterson, clean your fucking bed.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I have so many questions on it, but is there anything anything that you guys want to talk about or go into this or ask me or anything? We're going to do a podcast with JR about racism at some point. JR texts me randomly out of the blue and he's like, hey, let's do a podcast.
We can talk about it now, actually. That'd be great. Yeah.
I'm down. All right. This is part 2. We'll probably cut this into 2, but
Act 2
of it. That was a good Yeah, actually, I just have one final thought on that. I appreciate you guys opening it up or, kind of sharing those things on it. One of the things that I think it's funny, Leah, my wife, she tells me, she's like, the way that you talk to people, Josh, if you took you and put you out in the average like setting, like most people would think that you are trying to like manipulate them, take advantage of them. You're very, very intense, very, very, I know you're this or whatever, right? But she's like, everything you're saying, everything you do is, she's like, she knows me better than anyone. She's like, it's very pure, very, very genuine, right? And because I know I can be an intense person and I know I can be very seemingly judgmental. But one of the things that I really am trying to do, because I really am wrestling with it like heavily right now, is trying to understand like how far back, how people that I respect, like genuinely, right? That I like look at their life. I'm like, okay, cool. Like these are like in my friend group, you guys, like people like that, like that I know are smart, that I know that have experienced things, that have a good, healthy outlook on life or whatever. Like how you guys make decisions specifically from like an overarching structural frame. Because, and I kind of said that at the beginning, because it's like, one of the things that I'm doing without going into so much of the details with the whole Bitcoin thing, right, is I believe that the future looks very much like blockchain and looks very, 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 very different. But in order to build a society or in order to build the next generation of technology or whatever, there's structure around that, right? And so the reason America operates the way that it does is because of structures and frameworks, right? And I think that all of that starts with thought. And so I am very aware, like I'm very, very certain of my belief system. And I'm also very aware that my belief system is very, very limited, right? And one of the things that you told me, this was, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I think it's 2020 actually, in the midst of all my chaos on everything online, right, with the election or whatever, is you're like, Josh, one of the things is that it's fun to watch you is like, you take your opinion, you throw it out online, let it get attacked from every single different direction. And then like, if nobody has a better opinion, like that's your opinion. And if they do, then you can update it, right? That's basically it, right? And like with that, I'm like, I think that then we're entering a phase of life where there's going to be massive change, like at a fundamental reality level, even, right? I mean, with not just from the election, but I'm talking just like the whole world's just weird right now, right? And so I think that we will be part of the next generation of what builds a lot of structures and understanding. That's why I love Jordan Peterson, because it's like, I know he's so deep, but it's like, if you can just sit down and like listen to him for 2 hours, you're like, okay, I have enough to think on for the next 6 months, right? Because it's like you're pulling apart the structural pieces. So I appreciate you guys sharing that from both of those things because that was super, super helpful. So thank you. We're gonna move to Act 2, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Because I feel like you wanted to ask me this, and I love asking questions back.
Yeah.
I never take anything you say. I love our conversations, bro. We're talking for 4 hours before we even turn this on.
Yeah.
And updating people's belief systems, I think, is the number one like key character trait, in my opinion, that I want to adopt moving forward. And this is kind of why I said I'm hesitant to say I'm certain of anything,
Yep.
you know, because like there was a quote from Wayne Dyer that was like, how can I be so pessimistic in a world where I know so little? And so that's like my eyes just open to everything. But to you, because I almost think I feel like you almost wanted to ask me or JR this, what would it take for you to update your belief system to not believe in Jesus anymore?
You couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think that two things. One, I think the caveat to that would be I am not naive enough to believe that if I went through extreme hardship, like if it was a Job scenario, right? Like where I lost, like my wife and daughter were tortured and beaten and we lost everything. And like I went through a mental thing or like, I'm not naive to think that like my belief about Jesus or my belief about the world wouldn't like,
question.
Right. Or even that I could walk away, right? But for the grace of God. But like, as long as I am in sound mind, I am a follower of Jesus. And I think that every single other topic, 100% of other topics besides that one, I'm open to change, right? But I don't believe reality exists without Jesus. So if I die and nothingness happens, that will update my belief system, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love it. No, I mean, and I love that the certainty. It's interesting because the Bible, and it's interesting that you said you were reading the Bible a little bit. I love looking at pages of the Bible. And you said something I also thought was great. Like we have to pay attention to something that's lasted through kingdoms. It's outlasted civilizations. It's been around for thousands of years. There's so much good that comes from it, right? And if people adopted a lot of the core principles, now I'm not a Bible expert. I know there's some interesting passages in there. We'll say,
for sure.
But man, it's definitely not a bad belief system to hold in a lot of ways. Cause it's like, how can you argue with the 10 Commandments?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like starting with that, but even with Jesus, I know that's what in the Old Testament,
I
right?
understand.
But like, you know what I'm saying? Like with a lot of the stuff that Jesus, especially from my experience, and I could be wrong on this, again, not a Bible scholar, the stuff that I've read that have come out of Jesus's mouth is actually like amazing.
That's where I started. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the direct, like in the Bible app, everything that Jesus says is highlighted in red. So you see his exact words and you're like, how did this guy think? Like, that's interesting. What's the context of this situation? Why did he say that thing? Like it's a very, very interesting read.
Definitely. And I love like going down the rabbit hole and speaking to Jordan Peterson. Man, I went and saw him live and he told the most insane story off the cuff about Cain and Abel. And he also related to communism. It was amazing how he spun it all together. Yeah. But I love his breakdowns on YouTube where he's talking about the stories and the allegories and the things that take place. And he's like, you don't need to necessarily believe this literally about what happened, but if you pay attention to what's being said, here's the lesson that can be learned from it. Yeah. You know, there's so many great lessons to be learned.
One thing I want to add for context, and this is a 17-hour conversation, but I think it's important just to state as to why I came to the conclusion of my belief in Jesus. I do believe that any belief requires faith. The Bible says you can't know it as fact, right? There is a level of faith. Also, the reason I came to the belief that, I've studied a lot of religions. I'm currently very deep into Islam right now and studying Islam and their belief systems on things. But I believe that number one, my personal experience with Jesus, okay? So I've had personal experiences with Jesus. But then from a more logical perspective is I believe that you have to be able to answer in order to actually create, to give a meaning to all of this. Like you have to be able to answer 4 core questions about reality and the world that we live in and the humans as we know it. 1 is where did we come from? 2 is why are we here? Meaning. 3 is where are we going? And 4 is what dictates good and evil. And I think that if you have to be able to go, in order for me to believe something is fact or true, is you have to be able to answer all 4 of those questions and none of the answers can contradict the other. And I believe that the story of Jesus and the Bible's explanation and who Jesus is and what Jesus says. And by the way, when it's the word is Jesus and Jesus, the Bible is the written word. They're the same thing, right? One is flesh, one is word. They're the same though, right? The Bible is just the story of Jesus. And so I think that when you actually read it, there is no better explanation anywhere that explains the human condition and that answers all 4 of those questions, like, more completely without contradiction than that. So that's where I came to the conclusion on it and why I ended up settling. There's those two reasons.
All right. That's my last question for you.
Yeah.
Why do we have to answer those questions?
Well, because I think those are the 4 big questions that no matter who I went and studied and looked at, like those are the 4 big questions that everything comes back to.
Understood. Right? But why do they need to be answered?
because like we had to come from somewhere. Yes. We exist. Yes, we had to.
Energies. That goes. Don't they say energy is never created nor destroyed?
Well, like where did it come from? Right. So you either have to believe, just quickly on that one, like maybe not quickly. We'll just pivot into the racism thing from here, right? But like, you either believe that this came from nothingness, or it came from an intelligent God, and that God, the intelligent God that is infinitely more knowledgeable than us, there's some explanation to where he came from, or if he just was. And I'm like, it's much more likely that God existed forever and ever and just was than this just was, right? So like, we came from somewhere because we exist. So if something exists, where did it come from? And then same thing of like, where does it go? Now it might just end.
Yeah.
It might, right? But that's great. So there's an end.
I agree, and I'm just asking you.
Yeah, no, I know 100%.
This is
100%.
right?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
whenever someone has so much certainty in something, I always like to dig into it.
I don't have certainty in this. I have certainty in Jesus. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. But I guess, why do we need to know?
We don't need to know, but if we can answer those 4 questions, I think that.
So you want to know, and that's where your belief lies.
I think my desire to want to know these things, I think the desire to want to know them is inherent into each individual at different levels. Some people could care less, but as a whole, as a society, when I went and looked at all
you want to figure out because you're questioning like, where is life?
Right. When I looked at philosophers, when I looked at atheists, when I looked at religious people of all different things, it's like those were the questions that just kept coming up and just kept coming up and kept coming up. And I'm like, there were some people that would say this one over here, but like those 4 were like basically universal.
Those are great questions to want to answer. Yeah.
And I think that do we need to know the answer to those things? No. But if we want to know, like if we want to know about Jesus, for example, if we want to know if something is truth, right? In this case, it's like if something could answer all 4 of those questions, and the thing that answered all 4 of those questions did answer all 4 of them congruently and did not contradict, then maybe that would be something that we should listen to. And maybe that is true. And I have not personally found, and I've looked, so if someone's got something, if you're listening, I'd love to hear it. I have not found any religion, any explanation, any worldview, any of them that can answer those 4 questions congruently without contradiction, anywhere remotely close to what the Bible does. And so because of that, like that's how I came to the conclusion of that. And then the more I studied the Bible, the more it just reinforces those. It's like, oh, duh, right? So that's yeah.
No, I love it. I like the 4 questions. I'm going to think about those 4 questions too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm going to find something else, but that's a good frame. It's a good lens to look through if you do want to try and search for the answer.
Yeah.